afternoon, I'm joined by very interesting guests as we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation to get to look at the abuse in church, breaking the silence and of the abuse in the churches. Zambia, 1991, just after newly, crowned or put in the presidents of Zambia, that is Dr. Frederick Taito Jacob Chiluba, declared Zambia as a Christian nation, 1991 December. And since then, Zambia has, been upholding this. Many presidents have come and they've redeclared President Mwanawasa and a number of them, President, Michael Sata, 2021, just after winning elections, that yet again, President Hakainde Hichilema did also declare Zambia as a Christian nation. But there's just so much that happens in the churches. This afternoon, we get to break the silence of the abuse. Joining me is Inonge Siluka, who is the founder and director of Restored Hope Zambia. Inonge, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Keith. Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad to have you. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Great. And also joining us is Chalwe Chikoka Banda, who's a counselor and also an administrator from Restored Hope Zambia. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Keith.
How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Now, with the works that you do, first of all, let's get to define and try to get to look at this type of abuse. I know for some time, just not to digress, for some time, generally not just in the church, we've seen now even the abuse being extended to men being victims in the communities of abuse at the hands of their wives, and for the longest time there's been cause to put an end to this abuse. But now your organization, Restored Hope Zambia, penetrates the church. What was the reason behind, or what was the motive behind getting into the church and unearthing this abuse?
Sure, yes. First of all, I think there's just a gap there. So there's so many wonderful organizations doing a lot of work around gender-based violence in communities in different settings, but the church is a very tricky area to delve into and to bring this issue. It's already difficult to talk about in society in general, but when you bring the aspect of the church, it's very challenging. And I am a firm believer that we should pursue justice or correct wrongs in the spaces that we inhabit. Okay, so if it's in your home, that's where you need to start. Whatever is close to home, you don't have to worry about things happening over there. You start closer to home. So as a Christian, the church that's my doorstep. Okay, so as somebody passionate about justice, legal background, theological background, that was the vision really, is how can we step into that space as Christians and start talking about the issues. We were talking earlier just about how much people don't realize how much of an issue this is because there's so much silence in it. And so it's about breaking that silence, because without that, you can't deal with the issue. If you don't know it's there, you can't deal with it. And if you can't deal with it, then there are people who are languishing, suffering in silence, and they're not able to get the help that they need. And like I said, it's a tricky area. So there's certain ways in which you go around the conversation. There's certain language that you use in order to start to navigate it, because there's a lot there that I'm sure we'll have time to unpack.
And that will be very interesting, because I believe the truth has got no two ways to tell it. So if really, even we're trying to unearth this, something that is truth happening in the church, but we need to navigate and meander, well, that calls for more concerns. But let me ask Charlie to come in and as a counselor and also an administrator, with your findings, what are the most challenging or types of abuse that the community now and the church now is fighting?
Oh, okay. So the most common form of abuse, which is like out there, is sexual abuse. But as you speak to people and survivors, you start to unearth other forms of abuse. So as an organization, being Christian, we focus on the church. So within the context of the church, you get to realize that there's spiritual abuse involved there. To some extent, there's also financial abuse as well as emotional abuse. So, yeah.
All right, Inonge, looking at the church, Zambia, I mentioned it, and I think offset, we had a very little chit-chat to get a look at what this Christian tag on Zambia, but you'll understand, so there's also a percentage of people that do not belong to the Christian religion. With what's your spectrum? With your works, are you confined within the religion of Christianity? If you speak of the church, you are clearly just down in the church.
Yes. So the focus is just on the church. The reason for that is actually one of our foundations is that the values that we have as an organization and the foundations that we use to build on our work are Christian foundations. When I mentioned earlier about how we navigate, that's sort of what I was referring to. I'll just give you some examples of what some of those foundations are and how they can relate to abuse in general, but then also in the church. So when somebody is abused, somebody has taken advantage of that person. They've discarded them, they've treated them as if they're less than human in essence. So one of our foundations is what we call the Imago Dei, the image of God. So we believe that every single person, that's a Christian value, is made in the image of God, and therefore they are worthy of dignity, of value, of worth, regardless of their position. So some of the people we're dealing with, they're lowly in society. Nobody really cares about them. They have nothing to offer in terms of finances or position, but we say we still value you, and because we value you, we're going to listen to what you have to say and help you because you're made in the image of God. It's very difficult to bring in those foundations when you're dealing with other religions where you do not share the same worldview. So we hope that within those same other religions, other people would rise up and do the same thing, use the system or the values to challenge. So when we're challenging church leaders and telling them to take this problem seriously, we're actually using a theological framework. We're not saying, although it is true, the United Nations Declaration of the Human Rights of Children says this, we're saying, listen, the Bible calls you to practice justice, to care for the vulnerable. You see what I mean? So then it's a bit more effective because you're starting from the same place, as it were, and just expanding on some of the issues and giving practical solutions.
Before we dive deep into, but let me also get what your understanding is, and as an organization, what your findings are with regards to comments of how in the church circles they call it backsliding, because we find that within the church, people are the Christian themselves, and the ones that are not upholding these Christian values. I'm asking that question at the backdrop of trying to establish the best. What are the real causes of this abuse in the church? Is it because people have forsaken the values and the morals of the Bible, or what guides the Christians? What causes the abuse in the church?
Yeah, I think that is a very multifaceted. There's so many. I'll let Chalwe share some of the contributing factors. Some of the factors are theological, So yes, there are people who do not live out their Christian convictions. Okay, Christian means Christ once, so it means we need to look like Jesus in our actions, in our deeds. And so if you're abusing somebody, obviously that is not Christ-like, that does not look like Jesus. So yes, some of the reasons are the fact that people are actually not Christians. You have people who are in churches and they're not Christians. They're there for other reasons.
Yeah.
They're good at pretending they're fluent in Christianese, but they do not actually love Jesus. Okay, so that can be a contributing factor because they're there for other things. And that's how predators come to the church sometimes, and we don't spot them. They put on a nice suit, they put money in the offering basket, and
well,
no, nothing is wrong with wearing a nice suit. It's just they're blending in. Okay, so they put money in the offering basket. They act nice, but they want access to the children. And where else are you going to find easy access to children than the church? Without having, if you went to a school, you'd have to at least train to get there. But in church, all you have to do is walk in and say, I really, hallelujah, money, and really want to work with children. You've got full access to children. You see what I mean? So there's people with really, really bad motivations, and it's very difficult to tell, which is why we need to have certain policies in place, because you can't, just off the face of it, I line people up and I say, right, spot the abuser. You can't tell. It's very difficult to tell. So that's one of the reasons, yes, people with bad motivations do not love Jesus. But then there are cultural reasons that play into it as well. You know, you mentioned earlier about gender-based violence and men being abused as well as women being abused within homes, within context. The culture says certain things. If you're abused, you know, we don't talk about these things.
Yeah.
Don't air dirty laundry. So in the home, you don't air dirty laundry. In the church, you don't air dirty laundry. That creates a culture of silence. Now, that comes from the culture. The church should be saying, no, we're Christians. We need to shine the light in the darkness, bring truth and justice. But instead, the culture is influencing the church. So the same things you find in the homes and the communities, the same reasons and excuses you find them in the church. So that's another barrier, actually the culture itself.
The culture itself. Let me get more, maybe adding on to that from Chalo.
Just to add, I think even just the fact that people don't know what abuse is, they could be abused and they have no idea that they're being abused. So that's actually a reason why it's being perpetrated all the more. Like, just that you don't know what abuse is, and when it's happening, it's difficult for you to realize actually that you're being abused. The other factor could be vulnerability. You find that someone is maybe not financially stable or sound, and then you have this perpetrator or this person in power or position who's actually taking advantage of that vulnerable person, and in the process they end up abusing the person in question, actually. Yeah. Also, we have some people who are abused by virtue of them being disabled. Yeah, Inonge did mention some issues to do with policies, so we could look at issues of lack of safeguarding policies in some churches, which could also be a cause or a factor that actually abuse happens.
Oh, well, very interesting. But also, let's get to also establish now how the teachings are before we get, because you're saying others do not even get to realize because they just, trapped into this. You find that they're being abused and they do not know how to go about it. With churches, and I think traditional churches, you find that the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they've got the youth movement where they train people from a young age, on different, skills and topics just of life. I know as well of the United Church of Zambia, they've got the boys brigade, the girls brigade. They get to, teach the young people about different things. But when you say these people need to be aware, young people or big people in church need to be aware. It's not very common. There are certain topics, it's only now that they're incorporating into their, their teachings in curriculum. It's only now. I'll tell you, even the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'm speaking this because I'm part of the church. It's only now that they're now trying to introduce this because they've seen the need. But at what level should we intensify on engaging and having these conversations in church?
Yeah. From the word go, right? You know how in church you often hear sermons about sexual morality, okay? And, sexual ethic and what we should or shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be sleeping with this person, you shouldn't be sleeping with this person. When you're talking about that, you should really be incorporating at that point, because it seems like common sense, right? Abuse is wrong. But actually, you need to say it up front from the pulpit, because that makes the abuser uncomfortable.
Right.
The pastor said this is wrong. The survivor feels seen. The abuser feels uncomfortable. Right now, abusers feel quite comfortable in the church because there's silence on the topic. Mm-hmm. So even something as simple as from the pulpit, you're preaching on certain topics, things that are wrong, instead of just saying the society is wrong and deal with your problems inside, then start pointing at society outwards. So you can just say from the pulpit, actually abuse is wrong because people are made in the image of God. So if you abuse another person, it doesn't matter what they're wearing, it doesn't matter who they are in church, you are the perpetrator of that. It's wrong, you have offended God, and you have hurt that person who's made in the image of God. Simple. That's just in a sermon.
Let me get your word. It doesn't matter what somebody is wearing, whether in church or not.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Do you know why? Because when somebody is abused, there's only a victim and a perpetrator. The victim is never responsible for their abuse. Do you know one of the places where abuse is the most rife is in places where people are covered from head to toe, just have their eyes. And abuse is the highest statistics of abuse are in those places.
But I'm sure I've asked this question because even many people, I've had similar conversation even on TV, I've had engagements where people come out clearly and outrightly to say, sometimes there's this narrative, sometimes it's because of how maybe the dress code has been also a factor to this, because, I mean,
it's not a thing.
what is your finding?
So when you sexually, so just trigger warning, I'm about to talk about rape. You just wake up one morning and you're going to force yourself on another person. That is an evil. There is nothing that can justify that.
Absolutely.
So if we start bringing in a
dress code,
you're blaming the victim. That's the victim blaming. And we need to move away from that conversation. We need to move away from a conversation that blames victim. If you want to talk about dressing, whatever, do it in another context, but separate it from the conversation of abuse. Because already survivors are being blamed. What were you doing? What did you say? How were you acting? And therefore, statistics of children who are abused, they hear that. So every conversation that says this, the children, and whether it was in church or in the home, they hear that. And that's where the silence comes from. They've heard so many people blaming victims that they don't even want to come out themselves because they can't deal with that. And what is hurtful about abuse? The abuse itself is hurtful, but it's usually the responses to the abuse that cause the most damage. Because if you can imagine you're in a church, you expect this to be a place of refuge, right? These are people who have helped you, who have supported you, maybe through difficult circumstances. And this person has taken advantage of you, they have abused you, you're hurt, you're traumatized. And then somebody comes and starts doubting you, starts blaming you. The wound that causes, that is the most difficult to recover from. Because it's like you've been betrayed twice.
Let's look at some statistics or at the rate at which this abuse is moving in churches. If we were to look at statistics, and I know your organization is doing the most in trying to have engagements with these churches, what do statistics look like?
We don't have statistics. We just have lots and lots of stories. We're in the middle of doing a baseline study on the extent or knowledge of abuse in the church, but even that study is really a sampling across seven districts in Zambia, just to get an idea of few things. The reason we don't have statistics is precisely for the reason I just mentioned, the silence. So even the statistics that you will see for gender-based violence, that the Zambia police say, even they will tell you these are underreported statistics. So we don't actually know the true extent of gender-based violence in the country because most of them don't get reported. And if they're not reported, you can't record them. So that is something that is, well recorded by the police, by the authorities. The underreporting of sexual offenses, gender-based violence in this country is a big problem. And these are some of the barriers we want to eliminate. How can we create an environment within the church or even out with where somebody feels safe enough to report? Right now, somebody is thinking, if I report, if a bishop or this person is really influential, even if I go to that police station, they even go to that church. Do you see where the barriers now start coming in? Okay, the person I reported to, Banamayo, just told me to keep quiet so that I don't, destroy the reputation of the church. So if Banamayo, who really, she's a prayer warrior, is saying that, what chance do I have with a police officer? These are the dynamics we're thinking of.
Let me hear from Chalwe. With, Inonge has said there's a number of people, the victims maybe that you have, and you get these stories. As a counselor, what really conversation goes on with a victim? Maybe somebody out there might want to know what goes on. What sort of conversation do you get to have with victims?
Okay, so like we mentioned, even just from the name Restored Hope Zambia, our aim really is to help the victim, and we usually don't like to refer to them as victims, so we prefer the word survivor.
Survivors.
Yeah, so we would like to go step by step with the survivor, just to walk them through that process, because like Inonge mentioned, abuse is a very traumatic thing. So most of the times the victims or the survivors are really traumatized. So we usually move at the pace of the client. We go with what the survivor wants. Sometimes it could just be a listening ear. Someone would call, someone would walk through the premises and just share their story. Sometimes they just want somewhere to vent or someone to just speak to. So depending on what service they're looking for, we could give a listening ear. And then just also very importantly, I think Inonge touched a bit on this one, just to reassure the survivor that it wasn't their fault. At no point is it their fault. It doesn't matter what happened, what you're wearing, or if you went to this person's house at night or whatever. It's never your fault. There's no justification for a wrong. There's no excuse for abuse. So most of the times, Inonge mentioned, I think in the beginning, it's not something that just happens once off. Most of the time we've come to see a pattern where the perpetrators sort of groom these people. It's something that is premeditated. They plan on it. They build a certain relationship with their victims. They earn their trust, and at the end of it, they abuse this person. So this person would be robbed of dignity, and most of the time these perpetrators would want to make the person feel guilty for what happened, like it's their fault. So for us, really, apart from giving a listening ear, is just to reassure them that it wasn't your fault, and even this happened to you, God still loves you. You're still worthy of something, really, because when someone has been abused, their worth, their value, their self-confidence is trampled. Like, this person is crushed. So for us, we'll move step by step with the victim, depending on what they want. Inonge mentioned that we offer trauma-informed counseling. Apart from that, we have legal advice that we offer as an organization in case someone wants to take further steps, because these are criminal offenses. Rape, defilement, those are criminal offenses. So in case someone wants to take legal action, we have legal advice that we offer to our clients. That is to just make them aware of what their rights are, and if they decide to go a certain legal route, this is what would be expected. So pretty much it's client driven.
Brilliant. Now, to train and equip church leaders and planters to recognize and prevent is what you aim. How do you plan to do it?
Yes. So one of the reasons we wanted to incorporate that is because without the church leaders' involvement in this doesn't work. You can't prevent abuse in the church. Church leaders are not on board, because ultimately they are the ones with the power to transform their own communities. So, I mean, we would love if Restored Hope Zambia didn't have to exist, right? That would be a good thing. It means this wasn't an issue, right? And if it was just, honestly, it breaks my heart that we have to exist. It really does. And so we have to prevent the abuse from happening. I mentioned earlier, just giving some examples of somebody coming from, say the northern province, and they're beautiful, and they move to western province, put on a nice walk into a church, and they come, they join, and you're like, this young man is so promising. He wants to teach a Sunday school, wants to teach your youth, and you have no processes in place. They start messaging young girls on Instagram, commenting on their photos. You think, oh, it's a bit weird, but okay, maybe he just wants to. He's a millennial, right? That's fine. It's just But that's a grooming process that started. This person is now, oh, you look beautiful. 2-3 years later, okay, now he's meeting up with this, and you think, oh, that's a bit weird. But again, because this person is so trustworthy, they've earned your trust. So because there's no processes in place, you have given access to vulnerable people, which is children, to this person with no vetting processes, no procedures. And then if something then happened, what is the child going to do? Do you have a process for that? Who are they going to go to? They go to the pastor says, but no, surely this, no, they don't take it further, they don't take it seriously. So that's what we mean by prevent, is what processes do you have? This is what we refer to as safeguarding. Safeguarding refers to processes you have in any institution. This could be in an organization, in a school, in an orphanage, but also within the church. What processes do you have verbally, but also in paper, that everybody knows, the leadership and also the congregants, to prevent harm, any harm, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse for your congregants. And with congregants in particular, your vulnerable congregants, so children, the elderly, people with disabilities, any vulnerabilities. Somebody with disabilities, a predator will pick up on that, they'll prey on that. So for example, it's a learning disability that they have. This person might build a relationship with this person, manipulate them, take all their money. See, so that's a form of abuse, it's financial abuse. And you won't even realize it's happening. You just think this person likes working people with disabilities. Can she? If they're taking their money. You see what I mean? So you have a policy. Your policy then looks around your church and it says, who's vulnerable in our church? What are our congregants like? If you're in a rural area, poverty is another reason, or different reasons. Once you've identified who the vulnerable people are, then you start thinking, which areas can be exploited? I've given a few examples: youth ministry, children's ministry, even prayer ministry. You're going one-on-one to prayers at somebody's house. You don't know what's going on. Pastor prayer coordinator is touching women's breasts and saying it's an anointing. They don't realize that's sexual assault because They've been told that's an anointing. Imagine that's the only church they've grew up in, and that's their understanding of anointing. So they don't understand that that's abuse. Do you see? But if you have I'm just giving some examples.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very
So
interesting.
if you have policies in place, that's how are church leaders or people in leadership to interact with congregants in one-on-one situations. Safeguarding is not just about protecting vulnerable people; it's protecting yourself. So you will never find me. It doesn't matter the gender. One-on-one with a child. That to me is a safeguarding alarm bell, because if that child accuses me on offenses, make my word against theirs.
Yeah.
You see, so that's safeguarding. So if you have a policy that says no one-on-one, if somebody comes and you find the one-on-one in a room with a child, because you had the policy that says no one-on-one, whatever excuse they come up with
Doesn't count.
you are gone. Do you see how safeguarding works? Because you have clear guidelines, it's easy for people, because women know things are off, but they doubt themselves. Not that, brother. Okay, maybe it's just me. But
look,
when you have policies,
it's now becoming very, very dangerous. Just even to be found with your own niece, pure intentions. You can't go. Let me go and fetch a drink or anything. Uncle want to follow you. Nothing. Mothers cannot even trust you. Sisters-in-law, I'm saying they can't just trust you with anything because of what the church, what the world has become.
Yeah.
But I want us to maybe hear from you, especially on the part of, because I would say the females, the girls, or the women, because they are the most victims in this particular abuse. On the other side, at what point, or what's the level of conversations? I'm asking this. It could be because also the effects of the upbringing. The mothers, are mothers, aunties, or guidance readily available for these people? Just yesterday it was Mother's Day, and I saw to social media how people were floating out, pouring out messages of appreciating their mothers. But there's also a big issue that we're dealing with of absentee mothers. They are not around, so these girls, these ladies, they do not get to understand certain things, maybe that they be able to get to hear from, mothers. So what's the level of engagement, the conversations with them, realizing at what point should I know to say, red flag here, this is not normal. The way I'm relating to my uncle, the way I'm relating to such a person in church is not normal. At what point?
Yeah. I think that is something that is definitely a contributing factor. But I just want to throw another spanner in the works. Sorry to go on another tangent. But even with that example that you've given, you have somebody who's maybe taught the child, and they're there for their child. They themselves might be part of this community. So sometimes what predators do, and I can think of several cases where they actually befriend. In order to abuse the child, they befriend the parents. So you see how grooming works is what should be a red flag is looking more like an amber or green flag, right? Things that would normally you would be like, oh, that's off. When there's a relationship there, when you trust somebody and they're late. If it's somebody you don't know and they're late, you're like, this person doesn't care. But if you know somebody, I know this person, there must be a good reason. That's how it works. Okay, so if somebody has built a relationship, and usually this is what they do, with the family, with the whole church community, they groom not just the individual but their surroundings. They even sometimes separate them in one way from the child. So they might discover that the child doesn't have a good relation with their parent. Maybe they're going through a teenage phase or things like that. They'll then pretend, maybe to their mother, they'll pretend like they're helping them, to the child, they'll pretend, you see what I mean? So the level of manipulation that's at play is something that, yes, we can train and equip mothers to, how do we train our children? Mothers and fathers, by the way. How do we train our children? How do we have those relationships where we teach them about what is wrong and what is right in child-appropriate ways, of course. But without dealing with the church aspect and the manipulation that comes with that, because that's another layer. You could be an intelligent person. People think this is just people are not intelligent. That's how they get abused. Psychological grooming is at such a deep level that it's not even about intelligence. They find vulnerabilities within people and they exploit those vulnerabilities, whatever they may be.
There's a question that I'm yearning to pose to Chalo, but before I come to her, you've mentioned of how sophisticated these people, the perpetrators, get to be.
Yeah.
But doesn't that call for also a sophisticated plan to approach this?
Yeah.
Is there a lagging in addressing these issues?
Yeah. The lagging comes because we don't think we need to. So I've spoken to some church leaders who don't think, they say we've got elders, that's enough to deal with the problem. They assume that if you've got elders in the church, that's enough to deal with safeguarding. So it's this it's like a weakness and a strength within church settings that we take people as they come.
Well,
right?
let me try to engage on a caller. Sorry to cut you short. Hello,
sure.
good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kid. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, Muvi champion. How are you doing?
I'm fine. This time around, I have no contribution. I just wanted to find out if you have any maintenance going on, because the signal is breaking big time.
Oh, it's breaking. All right. There could be, but let me get back to you shortly and try to find out from the technical team.
Please, I'm unable even to follow the program.
Oh, sadly. It's very
Sure.
interesting. All right. Thank you so much. We'll get back to you shortly.
Good.
All right. Thank you. All right. Too bad. Maybe it could be some, technicalities that made some of you not to be able to follow us. But still, we're also live on Facebook. Be able to join us and join in this particular conversation. It's 1 minute past the hour of 2. That's in the afternoon, and we're looking at breaking the silence of abuse in church. So I don't know if Kachisho, if you need just to,
Yeah, I was just trying to say, because when we take people as they come, that's where the advantages come. So you almost need to think, yes, we want to be welcoming as churches, as Christians, but there are wicked people that exist in this world, and so don't always just take that as, oh, we're all Christians here, everything will be fine. In the same way, you have security at your church premises, huh? Most churches, especially ones with money, they have security. Why? Because they value their money.
They value
So the same way you value your money, think of ways of valuing your people and protecting them from people who are going to harm them and try to take advantage of them. And the same level of sophistication you apply it to people, just not the money. That must be the best illustration I can think of.
Oh, well. On a lighter note, I get to hear that most of these people, they would put stickers of their prophets or apostles, the pastors on the car, on the door of the house. And yeah, they would put there for, I don't know, protection or whatnot. Then, not realizing to say that same apostle, or pastor, or reverend, or bishop has tight security, long fence, electrified at home, and you only put your just the apostle.
Yeah.
But shall we? You mentioned of how you are there for these survivors and victims. Physical abuse, I think with time it can remain with a scar, but it can be gone with time. But psychological abuse, it's something that is very, very sophisticated and very,
Deep.
yeah, very deep, if you can call it that way. How far do you go with dealing with the survivors, with the conversations? How long do you go? How far do you go?
Okay, so just before I answer that question, I wanted to add something. You did mention that yesterday was Mother's Day, and you saw how people were posting, and you asked Inonge, shouldn't mothers educate? So for a long time, we focused on the girl child only and women, but I want to put it out there that even boys now, I think there's an increase of boys being abused as well, but probably this is a discussion for another day, that we don't get as many numbers because there's fewer reports, probably because of the simple reason that there would be discrimination, people laugh at males reporting. But the thing that I wanted to stress on that one is, despite the busy schedules, I think we need to be deliberate as parents in just educating our children, starting from our homes, even as they go to the churches. I don't care if you're my child's Sunday school teacher, you've got no business touching my child, or like Inonge mentioned, separating them and putting them in a private room or whatever. So I just wanted to stress that. Right. So going to the question that you asked, so as an organization, we'll go as far as we can, because I would want to mention at this point that counseling is not a once-off thing, it's perpetual. So depending on how the client is responding or opening up, we can take a long time. So some incidences, it will take a month, others a week, but we'll go as far as the client is willing to go. If you come to our premises, and whether you come or you call and you reach out to us wanting to help, and we begin the process, and at some point you feel like you do not want to continue, we will not force you to continue because you've reached out to us. So it's pretty much determined by the client. And then the other thing that we do as an organization, if we realize that this case needs maybe further management, we've got partnerships with different organizations where we do referrals. So we would refer in a situation where someone needs further management. So depending on the type of case that it is, on the counseling side, would go until the point where we see, okay, this person is restored, they're able to function back as themselves, then they are at least on that state where they are mentally functioning, they can fuse back into society. And ultimately, for us, we would want to restore these people back to be pointed to Christ. I think I did mention that in the beginning. It's not just about speaking to them. Of course, in the initial stages, we deal with what they're going through, the hurt, the trauma, but ultimately, we would want to restore them back to Christ.
All right, very interesting. Let me get to look at also as the Restored Hope Zambia, the core values of the organization. What are the core values of the organization?
Yeah, sure. So our first core value is that we are gospel-centered, we're Christ-centered. And that's where the Christian organization comes from. Not just Christian as in a general sense, just for the vibe, a little stamp to make us seem, legit to certain people. But in terms of the foundations that we have, what we believe about people, what we believe about justice, about humanity, comes from what the Bible teaches. So 4 of those main ones are just the image of God. So the value we have on people, the justice of God, we pursue justice because God is just, the love of God, the reason we care to do something which is not very popular is the love of Christ compels us to do that. And then the final one is, is the Church of Christ. Actually, the reason we want to work with churches is because it's Christ's church. So that's where the Christian biblical center comes from. The second value that we have is our impartiality. We're impartial. So we will support any survivor of abuse in the church, regardless of their gender. So male or female, young or old, regardless of church denomination, or regardless if they're Christian or not, we'll support them. And our third value is our independence. So we are a Christian organization, we have these core values, but we actually don't belong to any denomination. So wherever the person has come from, we will support them. We do not financially partner with churches because we don't want to compromise our work with survivors. And then our final value is our confidentiality. That is crucial to how we function because it's about the safety of the survivors, but it's also about our integrity and ensuring that we're not going to go around, which is why we're not giving specific examples, even as we're talking, we're not, because we don't want to. The church circle is so small in Zambia. If we started giving specific examples of cases, you'll be able to work out, and so we don't even as we talk, we'll speak generally because of that confidentiality. Yeah, so those are core values. We're gospel-centered, we're impartial, we're independent, and we're confidential.
Let me, with yours, what could be the successes that you've posed with your undertakings so far as an organization?
I think one of the most exciting things has been where we have trained some seminary students on the same issues we're talking about, prevention of abuse, how you identify vulnerable people, protect them, and how you support survivors, so in general. And the feedback from that was so overwhelmingly positive that you can see the transformative impact that's going to have. Because these students were about to become pastors, so they're going around all over Zambia. They're going to start churches, and from the word go, wherever they go, they have these values. They're going to be implementing them. That's exciting for us because that's what we want to do. That's what we want to see. From the word go, we want to create cultures that are safe, where there's well-being, where churches are a refuge. Because only then can people really flourish. You can only really properly preach the gospel and people, are cared well enough to be able to listen to the life-changing news that it is. So that's been, I would say, our biggest success is that, we're a startup in the sense that we're 2 years old, but being able to do that and already seen that impact has been, and that's what we would like to do more of that because that's been exciting to see.
And there's already obviously organizations that are, trying to fight this abuse in terms of gender-based violence, not just in the church, but away from the church in communities and societies. With Restored Hope, who do you target to be major key stakeholders even as you do your works? I mean, I believe you cannot just stand as an organization on your own. She mentioned if depending on the level of a case, if it requires a certain type to manage it, you'd simply throw it up to other partners or different organizations. So, who are your key, major stakeholders?
So we've been formally, just in terms of government institutions, because that's important as well. We have been formally recognized by the Ministry of Community Development, because we would also like to go into the community on the ground. This comes under the community initiatives, because we are media, TV, social media is community, but we'd also like to go in the ground. So the Ministry of Community Development, and would like to work more with them with that, and also the Victim Support Unit. That enables us to be able to follow up cases. It enables us to signpost cases as well. Sometimes we get cases that are not church abuse specifically, so we can't go with those cases from start to finish. It's not that we would abandon them at the start, but we would signpost those. There's organizations that have shelters that we would signpost to if somebody is life is in danger or they're not safe. And if somebody needs legal representation as well, our legal services are paralegal, so we just give the advice, we do not represent. So we would signpost if somebody it gets to that stage where they would need that. We also have a partnership with an organization that focuses on children, and especially counseling children just in general. So sometimes, like I said, you get a case that's just a general case and it's a child and they really need that counseling. We would signpost to that. In terms of where the case that the situation which I was mentioning, we have a partnership with a council organization where if somebody really needs, like maybe a psychiatrist, and that's what we're referring to, like the post-traumatic stress disorder, so where their trauma is so extreme that it's beyond our skill set. They really need to speak to a psychiatrist and get that help. That we would signpost such cases.
All right, Charlie, with you as an administrator and also a counselor, there could be people that also may want to be on the board. What kind of trainings? She's mentioned that other trainings that you need to maybe work with other counselors and how they can be able to be a part of this team, because I believe you need as many as you can.
Okay, so we need people to be trained primarily in psychosocial counseling, except we've just realized, it's funny we've been asked, we're having this conversation earlier, that most of the psychosocial counseling is focused on HIV and AIDS, but some form of
it's trauma-informed, more trauma-informed counseling.
Yeah. So would need someone to go through some trauma-informed counseling, like Inonga said, and also as an institution, we have some trainings that's tailored to our organization where it's biblical kind of counseling. We go through that biblical training from time to time.
All right, and also how are you reaching out? Are you just getting into churches? How are you reaching out to these churches or communities, churches in the communities or everywhere?
Well, primarily doing that through partner, like grassroots organizations. So I mentioned earlier on we were doing some baseline research, so some surveys and focus group discussions in 7 districts. So Chongwe, Chipata, Kitwe, Ndola, Lusaka, Mungu, and Solwezi. So there's grassroots people who are based on the ground there that have already connections in the community that we've been working with. So that's been what we've done so far, and at the moment we're in the process of trying to reach out to like church governing bodies just to see how best we might, probably more around the training aspect of things. So just what Charlie mentioned, some of our training is actually focused on church abuse dynamics, because there's a lot of training around GBV, but when you add the church element, there's more extra layers of complexity, some of what which we've shared today. So we want to train ourselves on that, but we also want to train the church leaders on that so that they are also aware, because sometimes it's not that they don't care, it's just the knowledge, it's just knowing what sort of issues and how to deal with them and give them a starting point. So if there's anyone that's listening that is involved in church leadership, that's what we want to do. We want to work with church leaders that are willing. We're not going to force it, but those that are willing, we are here.
All right, let's summarize in this way. Chalwe, maybe you could speak to somebody. I know there's people that are following, and for some reason they could be also a victim. Yeah. So how do they just get to open up? Just a little word to somebody who's been maybe under this stress, under this trauma, or maybe even they got recently involved in all this, maybe just to speak to somebody and how they can be able to open up and just follow up the process of, to get on the path of restoration.
Okay, so Inonge did mention that one of the things that we're big on as an organization is confidentiality. So you could contact us on our support line, which I'm going to share right now. It's 07769808818. That's 07769808818. So you could send a message, you could ask for a callback. We also have a website, www.restoredhopezambia.org. So there's an option there where you can click for a callback. If you want to remain anonymous, that is fine. You could call, just like I mentioned earlier, to speak to someone, just to pour out, and then we'll pick it up from there. We also have presence on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We're also on Instagram, so you could message us on Facebook and we'll be there to respond.
All right, beautiful. Let me get your last, remarks, with regards to the work and how you plan on restoring Zambia. Will Zambia be restored? I get asked this question because recently I was talking to somebody who was also just making some blunt statement to say, well, we're not a Christian nation. And now you're getting into the church to restore the church and the people. Will we ever be restored?
I actually don't know the answer to that question because I'm not sovereign and I do not know the future. But we will do our best to try and work with them. Whatever mess there's going to be, we'll still be there. We're not going to give up. So however terrible the church gets, we follow Christ, we're still Christians, we'll still be a Christian organization, we'll still be there for survivors, and we'll do our best to keep whatever is left of the legit church. We'll try and work with them so that we break the silence, we restore people back to Christ, we give them hope, we ensure that the church is not a crime scene.
Ask that I knew you don't have an answer, but I needed that answer that you have given. But otherwise, Inonge and Chalo, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making an appearance on the Lunchtime show today.
Thank you for facilitating this. It's been great.
All right, great. Thereabout, we'll be looking at the breaking of the silence of abuse in church, and I've been speaking to Inonge Siluka, who's the founder and director of Restored Hope Zambia, and also Chalo Chikokabanda, who's a counselor and an administrator from the same organization. This is the Lunchtime. We just take a very short break. On the other side, getting back to a close.